The biggest problem with using AI to vibe code apps is that it often looks like an AI made them. You know what I mean. It either looks like a super templated V0 style output, or it's got so many different color gradients going on that it makes your head spin. Or if you're really lucky, it looks so boring that someone might actually believe a human made it. And the problem is generic UIs cost you credibility, users, and revenue. Because professional designs are subconscious authority signals, meaning something that looks super professional implies that someone that really knew what they were doing built that thing. So the next 15 minutes, I'm going to give you tips to transform cookie cutter looking AI apps into interfaces that make people pause and say, wait, who built this? This video is going to be great for you if you're trying to become vibe coder extraordinaire, but you know subconsciously that the outputs you are getting just don't look like the way they deserve to look. So we'll go through my top 5 tricks, showcasing how each one helps transform your app into something that you'd be comfortable putting your own stamp of approval on. So let's get into it, shall we? So tip number 1 is using inspiration to create a token-based design system. And so this one is pretty much what it sounds like. Taking inspiration from other apps and using it to fill in a style guide that covers off on the primary components of our UI, meaning our primary colors, secondary colors, accent colors, functional colors, fonts, component styling, how we're going to use motion and animation and spacing. We want all of that codified into something that can be easily integrated into our AI-driven development workflows. And so the first piece of this, obviously, we need to mine that inspiration. Now, I talk about this a lot on this channel. I love to use a tool called Mobbin because it is very actively maintained, and they go out there and they download user experience workflows and screens from apps that we all know, love, and use. And so what we want to do, and the reason I love this tool, is that we can download these screens and we can use them to inform this first piece of our journey. And so my advice here is to find something that feels right to you. So don't find something that is in the same industry. If you're going to be building a competitor to Sweetgreen, don't go just download Sweetgreen's screens. That is a tongue twister. Try saying that 5 times fast. Sweetgreen screens. So in this specific example that we're going to be going through in this video, I'm going to be working on a social media blocking productivity app. And so I'm not going to pick something that is already that. So for example, I can go in here to Airbnb and I can look through and say this is one that I think is pretty cool. Well, I can go through and I can start just downloading out these screens. And so I will go through and download 10 to 12 of these screens that I think really encapsulate that overall aesthetic and overall vibe that I'm going for. So after you've done that, pretty simple. We just want to copy this prompt that we have, and we can go into whichever model it is that we want to use. So say, for example, in this one, I want to use ChatGPT 4. I can upload all of those images, and then I can paste in my prompt, and it's basically going to take all of those images now, and it's going to format them into that style guide format that we had given. Now, the reason that this is great is once this is done, if this is what we wanted to use as our inspiration and there were no changes we wanted to make, we could come through, we could copy out all of this from the accent colors to the typography to the buttons that we're going to use to the cards, the input fields, icons, spacing system, motion, all of that. We can copy all of that. We can pop into our project, and then we can actually integrate this into a token-based system, which means we've created this first layer of predictability. So now anytime the language model goes out and decides to code us a new feature, it's going to reference the, in this case, index.css file, and it is going to know, hey, this is the primary color. Hey, this is the accent color. This is the warning color. This is the success color. This is how easing animation should be done. This is how long that ease in or ease out should take. It's going to know all of that stuff out of the gate. And so here on our screen, we have an example of a component for this app where we're configuring our blocks, right? And this is something that if you were using, again, certain types of tools, you might get an output that is like, yeah, I mean, it's functional, but it looks like this, and this kind of looks boring, right? It looks pretty boring. And so how can we jazz this up using that style guide that we now have? And so now all I've done is I've gone into my project where I have this comparison screen for you guys. And I'm just telling it, hey, for this screen, I want you to apply that style guide that we just made to this screen. And we can see that is off and doing that in this sidebar. So we'll come back and see what the output looks like in a second. And here we go. So we can see already a huge visual change, right? Just by using a specific style guide that was formatted in a specific way and drew on inspiration from a very professional company's design, right? And so we can see we have this nice UI here where spacing is used a lot more strategically. We are using colors in a much better way. Our outlines are being done in a much better way. Just overall feels much better. But now, even with a great system like this, there's still something that's missing. How would a senior professional product designer actually use something like this, right? We have this style guide, but how would they use it? How can we drive the context even further so that this is not only a professional style guide, but it is being driven in the way that a professional would use it? That is where we get to the second tip, which I call a chain of thought echo. Now, to be honest, of all of the tips in this list, this is the one that has surprised me the most. Because having a style guide is one thing, but having an expert use that style guide to make something beautiful is something entirely different. So here's what we're going to do. We're actually going to go back and we're going to redo this. But here's the difference. We're going to add this step in where we tell the language model that we want it to think through the design. So we don't just want the output of this style guide. We want the chain of thought behind what the app actually is and how it implements that style guide to, again, make the user feel a certain way or experience the app in a certain way. And you'll see in a second exactly what that looks like. And so there are a few parts to this process. The first thing that we want to do, and I will use Claude for this, is that we, again, want to go back and we want to upload those images that we had. So I'll upload the Airbnb images, and then I'm going to paste in that prompt that we were just looking at. And so now as we start to get to this output, we see that there's actually an explanation behind how the style guide is being applied to that app. So for example, there's a deliberate tension between the clinical precision of the interface architecture and the inviting, almost playful brand personality expressed through that signature coral pink. It's like Apple's design language had a conversation with hospitality design, clean, functional, but with soul. And as we scroll down, we see more and more of this type of discussion, right? This isn't just interface design, it's experience choreography designed to make users feel capable, excited, and ultimately ready to trust strangers with their most precious commodity, time away from home. And so what we want to do from here is we want to get a similar insight now, but have it tailored to our app specifically. And so what we need to do is we need to explain what our app is. And so what we're doing here is another prompt, which again, you'll have access to below, where we want to get like an elevator pitch of our app that we're building. So again, this is a social media app blocker app that we are working on. And so I want a description of the main features of that app, the audience for that app, what we want those users to feel, and so on. And so now we have this description popping out of our app, right? The elevator pitch, the primary problem statement, the target audience, which I'm going to update because this is not the target audience I have in mind for this app. And we get into all of the main features. So now what's going to happen is we're going to think through, here's my style guide. Here's what this app is meant to do. And here's an expert description of how that style guide should be applied at every moment of creation in the app's interface. And so now what's happening is it's taking that same analysis that it did for the Airbnb app, but it is applying it to our audience and our problem. Where the Airbnb app creates emotional architecture around trust and exploration, this productivity app needs to create emotional architecture around discipline and achievement. This design challenge is profound. How do you make an app that fundamentally restricts access feel empowering rather than punitive? These aren't consumers looking for delight. They are operators looking for results, right? Because I want this app for entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs, people that are high performers in what they do, but they find themselves losing time to things that they really just should not be doing, right? They want Stripe level clarity, not Instagram level engagement. So the interface needs to speak fluent executive dashboard while still maintaining enough warmth not to feel too clinical. Okay, and now we can see over here, we have this new comprehensive style guide built out. And so the way that we're going to actually implement this is another prompt. So we are giving our app overview, right, which we looked at before. It was that elevator pitch. We're then loading in our chain of thought from that product designer, which again, we were reading out loud. So we're going to take in that product designer's point of view. And then we are going to load in a bunch of general UX UI principles, which again, you can access in this doc, which will be linked below the video. And now we can see there was there's a huge difference between that first screen that we had, which was where we gave just a style guide. And now the second version where we said, I don't want you to just create a style guide. I want you to think through how that style guide could apply to an app that is intended to work for my specific audience and accomplish my specific goals. And we get an entirely different output. So whereas this one on the left is a little bit more, again, Instagram-y kind of feeling, right? Based on the types of colors that we have. And overall just like feels basic isn't necessarily the best word, but doesn't feel like it's dialed in for the audience that is an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur or a high performer. Versus this one on the right, which has now started integrating a lot more of a UI that would speak to that type of person. So we have things, for example, like this little card up here talking about the daily recovery, which obviously these hours are off, but daily recovery potential in terms of time that we are going to get back by performing this block. We also have this pretty cool option for the type of focus mode that we want to enter into. Is it deep work? Is it a shorter cycle? Are we going into a meeting? Do we want to configure an entirely custom block? And then what I really like is how they started doing these impact scores, right? Saying, hey, you're spending 45 minutes a day on LinkedIn. This has a medium impact. Whereas you spend 2.1 hours a day on Instagram, that is a very high impact, right? And then as we begin to select different apps, it's actually totaling up the impact that this is going to have on us. So overall, a huge shift toward it's not just a style guide, it's now thinking about every time it builds a screen or builds a component or builds an interface, what does that mean to the ideal avatar for this app? And obviously, as we can see in these two screens, it's a huge difference. So now that we have a baseline, how can we start adding some spice and more cohesion to these designs? Well, tip number 3 is one easy way to do that: interactivity. Because one of the easiest to implement subtle flexes that can really level up your design is interactive elements and interactive components. What I mean by that is slight little changes in the UI that are responses or feedback to the user about things they are doing or things that they can do next in the app. So here's the prompt that we are going to use for that. So first what we're going to do is we're going to specify to the language model what we mean about interactivity. So making interactive possibilities immediately apparent through visual design language, creating responsive interfaces that communicate system state, creating spatial continuity and professional polish through purposeful motion design, utilizing natural movement, and then communicating the actual system status through visual responses, right? So we're saying this is what we mean by interactivity. Now, what I want you to do is first brainstorm the top 5 opportunities for implementing interactivity in this screen. And then I want you to implement the top 2 to 3 most impactful options that will add spice to the app, but not just like overwhelm the user with now there's animations all over the place. Now, I personally love this pattern of brainstorming and then implementing the best of those brainstorms. I use that in a lot of other UI screen brainstorming exercises. It's something you can also use to help debug bugs that you're experiencing in your app. It's a great overall pattern that you should consider using in your development workflows. And now we can see here inside of our Claude code, it has done exactly what we asked it to do, right? So it is first brainstorming different options that we have, and then it chose the top 2 to 3 options, and it is going through now, and it is implementing those specific options. And now if we look at the output that we have, there's a few changes that have been made. So for example, if I was to click on one of these like LinkedIn and then Twitter and then Instagram, we notice these counters are now incrementing live, right? And so if we were to compare that to this one, it just adds them up, and there's no real animation to how these numbers add up. They just change, right? Whereas this one now, it has this like counting effect, which is pretty cool. We also have these nice little UI loading indicators, right? You'll notice when I click on this that it loads up a bar compared with this one, again, which just shows a basic selection. And last little cool thing they've done, when we go to highlight over or actually select the activate or focus mode, we get this little shimmering effect there, right? We get this little shimmering effect of saying like, yes, this is something that you should click on and that will do something for you. And again, just looks a lot different than like a standard button hover on this side. So again, interactivity can really just help things feel a lot more professional. So an action item here for yourself would be go through your screens, whether it's a web app or a mobile app, and think through where could you apply interactivity in your app to make things just feel that much crisper. So tip number 4 is actually pretty simple, yet most people skim past it or don't pay a lot of attention to it, which is using high quality icon libraries and using them consistently. I personally use React Lucid for a lot of my projects. So if we were to look at these two UIs side by side, so this is one of those small things that can actually have a really big impact when it comes to like almost unnameable reasons why something doesn't feel quite right. And now one of the big issues with language models is if you're not very specific and particular about prompting design into them, they will mix and match icon libraries. So if we look at this left-hand screen, we'll notice that the icons don't actually all quite feel right together. And the reason for that is they're actually mixing up 2 or 3 different icon libraries at the same time. For example, this chevron logo down here on this activate focus mode button does not come from the same library as, for example, this lightning bolt, as does this graph symbol. And so when a user is experiencing the app, these are the subtle types of cues that they pick up on. Now, if we were to go look at this right-hand side screen where everything is using React Lucid, it feels a lot tighter. We'll notice a lot with React Lucid that there's not a lot of like bolded, filled in icons, right? The lightning bolt is an outline, the brain is an outline, the little people in the box is an outline, the graph are outlines. And then again, hopping back over to this other screen, we can see we have this mix and match of these lighter outlined icons and these super bold filled in icons. A bolded filled in graph, a bolded filled in icon of 3 people versus these lighter, not filled in lightning bolt icons or brain icons or even chevrons. So this one, again, is simple, but has a big impact. So our last tip, tip number 5, is one that is, again, very subtle. Most people don't think about it, but it separates the wow factor from apps that really just blow you away from ones that are meh, right? Ones that are so-so. So what I'm talking about is microcopy, meaning what you are saying and the words you are using in your app. I'm going to talk differently to a student than I am someone that is a seasoned entrepreneur. I'm going to talk to somebody different that needs subtle encouragement versus someone that needs a boot up their butt, right? I'm going to talk differently to those people. So depending upon what your app is, the problems that it solves, and who it's meant to solve those problems for, we need to communicate differently to them. Microcopy is what allows us to do that. And so here's what we're going to do. We want to, again, take the app overview and that chain of thought from our senior product designer, and we want to use it to build out a comprehensive brand personality and microcopy guideline. So the thing that's nice about this is we have a template of what each of those actually means. So what is the primary tone of this brand identity, right? Is it minimalist? Is it technical? Is it encouraging? Is it sophisticated? Is it rebellious? Is it professional? What is the core identity of your brand? How formal do you want to be in your communication? So for example, are you super casual yet technical? Because then you might be making jokes about tech stacks, right? So it needs to be very clear. So you need your formality level, you need your tone, right? The tone of your brand. How are we going to be expressing emotions? How do we want to address users? Do we refer to them as we because we're part of their team? Or is it all about them? Or is it all about you? And so we go through and we're having our system, again, we're having the language model pick out which of these makes the most sense, again, based on that chain of thought, based on what we're trying to accomplish, who we're talking to, and so on. Now, if you feel very strongly about this, you can obviously come through and fill this out yourself. In fact, I would probably say that is something that you should do. And now after we have that, we can work on how does that translate into our microcopy. And so we're giving examples, right? So for Linear, for example, which is a product, which is a company that a lot of people admire for their product design, an empty state might say something like create your first issue instead of no data, right? So how it's managing empty states, for example. And so that is what we are doing in this exercise. And then we're just passing in our, again, app information and saying, hey, I need you to go update that screen based on all of this. So if we were to pop this into a tool like Claude, we can see what the output of getting this guideline actually looks like. So let's talk about some of these outputs real quick. So again, avatar for this app are like entrepreneurs, people that are generally high achievers. They like to achieve things. They find that as like a value in their life to try to like achieve great things for themselves, but they still struggle with like focus and productivity at times. And so that needs to reflect in the way that we're going to talk to those people, right? So when it comes to like formality, for example, if you ever worked in like the tech startup world, it's like it's professional casual, right? Not some stuffy suit wearing type of place, kind of casual, but it's also like not unprofessional. So words like hello instead of hi or greetings, for example, using certain types of contractions, but overall it's like kind of balance between being professional and being casual. Overall optimistic framing of things. So if someone, for example, breaks out of a focus session, how can we frame that as a positive, hopeful thing or a way to change as opposed to like a punitive, damaging, punishing type of thing? Sentence structure. So sentences are going to be very short and punchy, right? 3 to 7 words. Fragmented sentences are okay. Very like impact-driven things that we want to say to people. And so it continues through and it gives us an entire guide that we can really apply to every single thing we are building in our app. For example, how are we going to handle errors? This type of person probably doesn't care about you apologizing. They just want the fix, right? So we're going to skip the apology, jump to the fix. We're not going to say, hey, oh, I'm so sorry that API request failed. We're going to say, here's how you fix it, right? So it changes how we interact with people through our app, through our notification systems, through the UI, how the UI responds to us and everything. And we just get a lot of examples of how that shows up in the app. So for example, empowerment through restriction. We're going to frame blocking these apps out as a strategic choice, not a limitation that they're being forced to put on themselves because they're incapable of just doing this themselves, right? And then that flows through into how we say everything to these people. We want to use language that positions the user as a decision maker, right? Someone with agency over the decisions they're making. You've chosen focus time versus, hey, this app has been blocked, or strategic pause activated instead of app is unavailable. You shouldn't be clicking this button. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. And then again, if we were to apply that guide now that we just made to our screens, we can again see how this starts to manifest. So instead of this idea of daily recovery potential, like recovery implies that I lost something, we have daily focus gained, right? And so that's aligning with how we said we want to speak to this person. Even things as simple as, are we configuring a block or are we configuring a productivity session, right? Subtle, but talks to the right person in the right way. Now, again, all of these prompts and everything we're going through will be available in the description below. Now, I said this was a 5-tip video, but tip number 6 is a bonus tip, and it's actually a tip that I did an entire video on that I will link somewhere around here, and I'll make it the end card on the video, and I'll also put it in the description below. And that tip is evaluator optimizer workflows. A lot of the time, we're going to give these awesome guides. We're going to give them that style guide and the chain of thought echo and the language guide and the microcopy guide. We're going to give it all this stuff, and we're going to get outputs that we're not exactly 100% thrilled with. So what do we do in that situation? Well, one such amazing tool for that is an evaluator optimizer workflow, meaning we take a separate chat, right, an entirely separate context window, we open it up, and we tell the system to grade itself based on what it has done for us and the guidelines that we originally gave it. And there's a lot of power in doing that because it's going to give itself specific feedback that it will implement. And the really cool thing that you can do is you can integrate an MCP server like Playwright, for example, to actually do that with real screenshots of your app. So it's going to take the screenshot, it's going to understand what's wrong with it, and it's going to use those actual screens to grade itself, again, against the parameters that you set. I'm not going to go through that in this video because it would turn into an hour-long video, but I did an entire 15 to 20-minute video on this last week that, again, I will link here, and you should go watch because it is an amazing tip. So these 5 tips are absolute no-brainers that you should be integrating into your workflows anytime you build an app. It's so important. I'm going to link an entire playlist below of all of my design-oriented videos that cover off on different pieces of this process. Now, if you're new to the channel and want to keep updated with awesome videos like this, drop a subscribe so that you actually get notified when these things come out, and you can be one of the first people actually implementing them. And if you're already a subscriber, let me know what type of video you want to see next because I farm the comments for video ideas. So anything you're struggling with, anything you need help with, drop a comment on it below and I might make a video about it. Again, professional designs impart subconscious authority signals, so do not sleep on it. But that's it for today. I will see you in the next video.